The bodybuilders who you're seeing from the early 1900s and the late 1800s were not so jacked because they had better genetics or they were eating better food. Number one, the genetics argument is nonsense. And number two, their food was fucking poison. Allow me to introduce you to a book you all need to read. The Good Old Days, They Were Terrible. Now, this book illustrates very, very succinctly all of the points that I have been making in articles throughout the years. But let me start with milk. It was common knowledge to New Yorkers that their milk was diluted, and the dealers were neither subtle nor timid about it. All they required was a water pump to boost 2 quarts of milk to a gallon. Nor was that the end of the mischief. To improve the color of milk from diseased cattle, they frequently added molasses, chalk, or plaster of Paris, none of which are helping your gains. Bacteria-infected milk held lethal possibilities of which people were unaware. The root of this problem was in the dairy farms, invariably dirty, where the milk cows were improperly fed and housed. So it was not unusual for a city administration to sell its garbage to a farmer who promptly fed it to his cows, or for a distillery to keep cows and feed them distillery wastes, producing what was called swill milk. This particular liquid, which purportedly made babies tipsy, caused a scandal in the New York of 1970 when it was revealed that some of the cows cooped up for years in filthy stables were so enfeebled from tuberculosis that they had to be raised on cranes to remain milkable until they died. Not great. When in 1902 the city's health commission tested 3,970 milk samples, it was found that 2,095, or 52.77%, were adulterated. That's not fucking great. And adulteration, by the way, adulteration of foodstuffs was conventional practice among the bakers and grocers of the 1880s, who met the growing food demands of city residents by extending their raw materials with a variety of questionable additives. The bakers, never noted for cleanliness, and historically obdurate to public criticism, stretched and preserved their dough with doses of alum and sulfur of copper. Customers were continually enraged to discover chunks of foreign matter in their loaves, such as oven ash and grit from bakers' machinery. Not helping your fucking gains. The national craving for a cup of really good coffee was just as intense as it is today, though there were chances of brewing one were incalculably smaller. A report from the 1870s suggests why. How complacently we receive from the hands of a grocer a package of pure Java, which is not Java at all, but a mixture of roasted beans and peas flavored with ever-present chicory and rye, which is something the Southerners started doing during the Civil War because they couldn't get any coffee. Candy could not be made without Candy could not be made attractively colorful without the addition of strongly toxic substances. The resultant sweets, on which the children nibble all day long, contained elements that were markedly dangerous, the degree of harm depending on the health of the consumer and the amount eaten. Dairy byproducts, it appeared to the Victorian manufacturers, provided a fine opportunity to improvise. Here, imagination was needed, not scruples. Imagination to make butter. Not making Maxic jacked beyond all recognition, one would think. Maybe it was his lifting. And the butter they produced demonstrated a remarkable talent. Not for making butter, but for making money. Selling in the 1880s for a respectable average of 19 cents a pound, it was often rancid, and either a mixture of casein and water, or of calcium, gypsum, gelatin fat, and mashed potatoes. And the alternative was bogus butter. So that was the good butter, and now the alternative is bogus butter. And the ingredients of this concoction were so wildly incongruous as to generate several investigations by city and state. Fat from hogs, along with every conceivable animal part that the slaughterhouses could not turn into cash, were picked up by the oleo makers and processed in filthy worksheds. Bleaches were blended into the mix to give the product the appearance of real butter. A margarine factory employee in 1889 told the New York State investigators that his work had made his hands so sore, his nails came off, his hair dropped out, and he had to be confined to Bellevue for general debility. Bellevue, by the way, is a mental institution. So there you go. All right, so the milk is getting people drunk. The butter is sending people to the insane asylum. And let's talk about the meatpacking industry now. Before the rise of the meatpacking industry, beef reached the cities on the hoof, shipped live from the west in slow trains. Then they got there emaciated and maimed because they were packed into these fucking things and then shoved like across the country in a very, very rickety contraption and not fed apparently the entire way. So they arrived so emaciated and maimed that their drovers had to prod them with pointed steel rods to keep them on their feet. awesome. Yeah, I think it was maybe the food making them so jacked, huh? These conditions made it difficult for even the rich to buy fresh viands, if you were thinking that maybe it was just a poverty problem. The danger people are in, the city people are in constant danger of buying unwholesome meat. The dealers are unscrupulous, the public uneducated. The poor, meanwhile, had to settle for the cheapest cuts, which were often decayed. In the absence of electric refrigeration, perishable goods were subject to the whims of the weather. Meat and fowl for sale were simply hung on racks or placed on market counters. Yeah, it was their food making them jacked, wasn't it? Except in rarefied circles, people did not practice artful cuisine or etiquette, which were regarded as incompatible with the no-nonsense sentiments of a bullish nation. Harper's Magazine observed of contemporary cooking habits, we are indifferent to a degree that is almost criminal. If you pass out of the narrow range of millionaires, you find a superabundance of bad, hasty cooking, indigestible hot bread, tough beefsteaks, and greasy potatoes. Consider, too, that this fare was eaten at flank speed, whether at home or in a restaurant. Americans, it was noted, take their food as if it was part of their work. Does that sound familiar to you guys? Because I think it should. Yeah, and the lifters back in the day, not. They were really well known for sitting their asses down and eating a massive meal pretty fucking slowly. In a 1956 article, Why We Get Sick, Harper's described a businessman rushing through dinner where 10 to 1 he is clinching a bargain between bolted beef and bolted pudding. Waiters loyal to the ritual often served all dinner courses simultaneously, goading the diner to speed up his wolfing so he could finish his soup before his entree got cold. That's fucking lunacy. Now, I'm not one of these people who's going to tell you that you need to masticate all your food to death, because I think that's probably pretty fucking dumb. But you should chew your food before eating. We're not snakes, and digestion begins in the mouth. Your salivary glands actually help digest the food, as do your teeth, breaking it down. So, yeah. But we were not paying attention to that back in the day, because foreigners were greatly amused by the American office sign, out for lunch, back in 5 minutes, which neatly suggests the atmosphere of the standard eating place. The clatter of plates and knives, the slamming of doors, the bellowing of waiters are mingled in a wild chaos. Everybody talks at once, orders at once, eats at once. The same circus-like scramble prevailed in the boarding houses, where a long reach increased the inmates' chances of survival. Dickens described the reduction in 10 minutes of a heap of food to a few scraps as if a famine were to set in the next morning. The Hungarian writer Vajdevaya held the opinion that a regimen calculated to injure the stomach, teeth, and general health, no one could surpass the Americans. Whatever the clinical definition of stomach distress, it provided a goldmine for the patent medicine makers, who might as well have advertised, "We will help your stomach digest any food properly. You do the eating, we'll do the rest." Which, I'll add again, the lifters that you know about were traveling with these snake oil salesmen, helping them sell them. That's what they did. So what were those dudes eating? Like I said, I've written an entire article series about this. It's called the Empire Builder Diet. But again, I'm just coming from this book because it's so dope. The staff of life in the West can be described with laudable brevity. Corn. Easily cultivated on the frontier, corn kept the pioneers from starving and enabled them to make the great push onward. Without it, the Great Migration, some believe, would have taken 100 years. So Americans were planting corn before they were even cutting down trees to make a field, because it was something they could survive on. The problem was that pioneers were sustained by corn, which could be planted in the woods even before stumps were cleared. Fed on a steady diet of corn and salted hog meat, children suffered from vitamin deficiency and developed scurvy and scrofulous sores. Scrofulous. I don't think that scrofulous sores are helping anybody's hypertrophy. However, it might. Not that they gave a fuck, because they were all drunk and filled with cocaine. And I just can't emphasize enough how filled with cocaine all those old-timey guys were. But until like 1916, everybody was on cocaine. Popes, doctors, everyone. The person who founded modern medical practices and the reason why American interns work so fucking long is because a cokehead decided that that's what they were going to do. So the American medical industry was literally founded by a cokehead who then developed a heroin addiction because he was trying to quit coke. That's That's the world these people were living in. Everybody was filled with cocaine. So if you're wondering where they got their abs, cocaine. If you're wondering why they were so jacked, cocaine fueled a really, really long training sessions. I mean, these guys were performing between like 3 and a dozen times a day, 5 to 6 times a week, which means they were doing near maximal lifts several times a day at the very least in these short performances, 15 minutes. And so they were doing those. Then they were getting their lifting in like for an hour and a half, 2 hours also. And they were doing hand balancing, rope climbing. They were doing a ton of bodyweight stuff. And then they would do their weightlifting on top of that. The thing is, though, they were walking everywhere. And if they weren't walking, they were riding horses, because cars weren't even a vague thing until 1914. And it was really after World War I that everybody started driving cars. Model T really became a big thing around in there. But still, you're looking at the 1920s, or the time when people really started driving, and they still were walking everywhere. So walk more. Climb a fucking rope. Do some bodyweight exercises. Eat a lot of fucking food. If you really want to replicate the feats of Maxick, find a good coke dealer who doesn't put fentanyl in his coke and give it a fucking go. As to the dosage, I can't really give you any recommendations, because those guys were on a different level of cocaine than any of us will ever understand. Ask somebody who lived in the 70s, maybe. They might be able to tell you. Terrible Ted Arcidi definitely knows his way around some cocaine, so if you happen to see that man, he can tell you. And then he can also tell you about how he whipped a chair into a freeway to celebrate after he broke a world record in a bench press.